It's simple, Miranda. Once the doctors confirm the diagnosis, we petition for conservatorship. We control the assets, we make the decisions, and we make sure she's comfortable. Those words spoken in my sister-in-law's clipped, efficient tone slithered under my bathroom door and froze me where I stood. My hand, damp from washing my face, gripped the cool porcelain of the sink. I didn't breathe. I just listened, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The voice that answered was my brother's lower, more hesitant. "Lydia, are you sure about this, Mom Sharp? She'll fight us." "David, your mother is 70 years old and she's been forgetful. We have the power of attorney for a reason. This is for her own good. We can't have her making irrational financial decisions, not when the family legacy is at stake. That brownstone is worth millions. We secure it, we secure our future. It's practical." For her own good. The phrase hung in the air, toxic and familiar. Practical. It was never about Mom. It was always about the money, the beautiful historic brownstone in Georgetown, that our mother had poured her soul into the same brownstone I had been managing for her for the past 5 years. I am Miranda Evans, 48 years old, a former history teacher who traded grading papers for managing a premier DC rental property after a messy divorce left me financially and emotionally adrift. My brother David, 3 years my senior, was the successful one, a partner in a sleek, lobbying firm. His wife Lydia was his perfect, polished counterpart, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes. And my mother, Eleanor Nora Evans, was the heart of it all. A vibrant, brilliant historian who had turned our family home into a sought-after venue for political dinners and intellectual salons. Until recently, a minor fall 6 months ago had shaken her confidence, and the natural forgetfulness of age had become, in David and Lydia's eyes, a convenient tool. I finally exhaled the sound, shaky in the quiet room. I had known they were getting pushy about Mom's finances, but this a conservatorship. It was a nuclear option, a legal straitjacket that would strip her of all autonomy. They were talking about my mother as if she were a problem to be solved, an asset to be secured. I flushed the toilet for cover, ran the water, and pasted on a neutral expression before opening the door. They were standing in the hallway, Lydia with her phone in hand, David looking uncomfortable in his own skin. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice miraculously steady. "Perfect." Lydia chirped, her smile a swift, practiced gesture. "We were just discussing your mother's care. David and I feel it's time for a more structured approach." "I'm managing her care just fine, Lydia," I said, crossing my arms. "I live here. I'm with her every day. Her doctor says she's perfectly healthy, just a little scattered sometimes." "That's the point, Miranda," David said, finally finding his voice. "You're not a medical professional. You're her property manager. We need to think about the long term. We've set up a meeting with Dr. Evans next Tuesday to discuss our concerns." Our concerns. He was including himself now, falling in line behind his wife. I looked at my brother, the boy I'd built forts with, the man who'd stood by me during my divorce, and I saw a stranger. A stranger who saw our mother as a liability and our family home as a portfolio entry. "The long term," I repeated softly. "And what happens to me in this long term, David?" "When you secure the brownstone," Lydia answered for him, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. "Oh, Miranda, we'd never leave you high and dry. There would be a transition period, of course. We'd help you find a lovely little apartment. Something more. Manageable." A lovely little apartment. The dismissal was so complete it stole my breath. They wanted to box up my mother and put me out with the trash. This was my home. It wasn't just a building. It was my life's work for the last 5 years, the anchor I had clung to when my own world fell apart. I just nodded a numb, mechanical motion. "I see. Well, I need to check on Mom. She's resting before the guests arrive for the Aldridge dinner." I walked away from them, my legs feeling like wood. Each step on the polished hardwood floor echoed the pounding in my head. I entered my mother's suite, the grand book-lined study on the first floor that she'd converted into her bedroom after her fall. She was sitting in her favorite armchair by the bay window, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt open in her lap. The evening light caught the silver in her hair, creating a halo effect. She looked up and smiled, her eyes clear and intelligent. "There you are, darling. I thought I heard voices. Was that David and Lydia?" "Yes, Mom." I knelt beside her chair, taking her delicate veined hand in mine. It was warm and steady. "They're just worried about you." She let out a soft, unladylike snort. "They're worried about their inheritance. I may be old Miranda, but I'm not a fool." She squeezed my hand. "You're the only one who sees me. Not the brownstone, not the money. Just me." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I blinked them back. In that moment, the last shred of doubt vanished. The conversation I'd overheard wasn't just gossip. It was a declaration of war. And they had no idea that the quiet, accommodating daughter they were planning to evict had just become their most formidable enemy. I had 1 week until that doctor's appointment. 1 week to prove my mother was competent. 1 week to protect our home, and I would use every second of it. I looked into my mother's wise, tired eyes and made a silent promise. I would not let them erase her. I would not let them shrink my life into a lovely little apartment. The battle for the brownstone had begun, and I was ready to fight dirty. The next 7 days were a masterclass in silent warfare. Every smile I gave David and Lydia felt like a lie etched onto my face. Every polite conversation was a strategic maneuver. I moved through the grand rooms of the brownstone, the high-ceilinged parlors, the formal dining room with its heirloom silver with a new ferocious purpose. This wasn't just my home, it was my battlefield. My first move was digital. That night, after the Aldridge dinner guests had left and the house was quiet, I sat at the small desk in my private sitting room and dove into the labyrinth of our family's finances. Mom had always been transparent with me, giving me access to the accounts related to the brownstone's upkeep. But now I looked with a predator's eyes. I found it within 2 hours. A series of transfers neatly categorized as consulting fees from the brownstone's main operating account to a company named D&L Strategic Holdings. The payment started small, $500 here, $1,000 there, but over the last 18 months, they had ballooned to regular $5,000 monthly deposits. The total was just over $80,000. My hands trembled as I clicked through the statements. D&L, David, and Lydia. They weren't just planning to take over, they were already leeching from the estate, siphoning funds under the guise of vague consulting services. What advice could they possibly be giving about a historic rental property? How to be more pretentious, I took screenshots, saved PDFs, and compiled a digital folder I encrypted and hid in 3 separate cloud locations. This was my first piece of ammunition, but it wasn't enough. To stop a conservatorship, I needed to prove not just their greed, but my mother's undeniable competence. I became her documentarian. I discreetly recorded videos on my phone of Mom discussing current events with the sharp analytical mind that had once captivated senators. I filmed her effortlessly recalling the provenance of a particular piece of art or detailing the complex guest list for an upcoming charity gala she was helping to organize. I logged every pill she took, every healthy meal she ate, every lucid and witty comment she made. But Lydia was a step ahead. The subtle campaign of erosion began in earnest. It started with helpful gestures. Lydia began reorganizing the kitchen, moving Mom's favorite teacups to a high shelf she couldn't reach, misplacing her reading glasses. She'd say things like, "Now, Nora, don't you worry your pretty little head about that," when Mom asked a question about the property taxes. Then came the gaslighting. "Mom," David said one evening, his tone gently condescending, "you told us last week you were thinking of moving to a retirement community. Don't you remember you said you were tired of the stairs?" Mom's face crumpled in confusion. I did. I don't recall that, David." "Oh, you did," Lydia chimed in, her voice smooth as silk. You were very clear. You said you wanted something simpler. It's perfectly understandable. I watched from the doorway, my blood boiling. Mom has never said anything of the sort to me. I interjected, my voice tight. In fact, she was just telling me yesterday how much she loves watching the garden change with the seasons from her window. Lydia's smile was a razor blade. Well, Miranda, you know how her memory comes and goes. She must have forgotten she told us. The climax of their psychological assault came 3 days before the doctor's appointment. Lydia found a burner phone, the cheap disposable kind tucked under the cushions of Mom's armchair. Nora, Lydia said, her voice laden with fake concern as she held up the phone like a piece of evidence. What's this? Were you trying to call someone? You know you have your regular cell phone. This is so confusing. It worries me that you felt the need to get a secret phone. Mom looked genuinely bewildered. That's not mine, Lydia. I've never seen it before. Of course it's not, I snapped, striding into the room and plucking the phone from Lydia's hand. Where did you really get this, Lydia? A gas station. This is a new low even for you. David stepped between us, his face a mask of strained reasonableness. Miranda, there's no need for accusations. Lydia is just concerned. We all are. This is exactly the kind of erratic behavior we need to discuss with Dr. Evans. I saw the trap then. They were creating a paper trail of concern, fabricating evidence of incompetence. The stolen money, the psychological manipulation, it was all building toward that one appointment. The night before we were to see Dr. Evans, I couldn't sleep. I paced the length of my room, the ornate Persian rug swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I had my videos, my financial records, but would it be enough? Dr. Evans was a respected gerontologist, but he was also a golfing buddy of David's. How impartial would he truly be? I needed a witness, someone beyond reproach. I thought of Arthur Pendleton. He was Mom's oldest friend, a retired federal judge with a spine of steel and a deep abiding love for my mother. He had been a constant presence in our lives, a surrogate grandfather to me after my own father passed. He knew Mom's mind better than anyone, and he despised Lydia's social climbing artifice. It was 1:00 a.m. I didn't care. I picked up my phone and called him. He answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with sleep but alert. Miranda. What's wrong? Is it Nora? Not yet, Arthur. I said, my voice cracking with the strain of holding everything together. But they're trying to put her away. David and Lydia. They're going for a conservatorship. I spent the next 20 minutes pouring out the whole sordid story. The overheard conversation, the stolen money, the misplaced teacups, the burner phone. I heard his breathing grow heavier, more furious on the other end of the line. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he spoke, his voice like tempered steel. They dare to do this to Nora. He cleared his throat. I will be at that appointment tomorrow, Miranda. Do not say a word to them. Let them play their hand. I want to see it for myself. When I hung up, a sliver of hope, cold and sharp, finally pierced the veil of my dread. I had a general in my corner. The next morning, we assembled in Dr. Evans's sleek, modern office, a stark contrast to our historic home. David and Lydia sat side by side on a low leather sofa, a united front of manufactured concern. I sat next to Mom, holding her hand. It was cold. Doctor. Evans, a man with a kind face and a carefully neutral demeanor, began the consultation. He asked Mom standard cognitive questions. What year is it? Who is the president? She answered them all correctly, her voice gaining strength with each one. Then Lydia leaned forward. Dr. Evans, we're so grateful you're seeing us. We've just been so worried. It's the little things. She forgets conversations. She gets confused about her medications. Just yesterday, she bought a second cell phone, a cheap thing, and hid it in her chair. We have no idea why. She presented the narrative of decline with such conviction, such sorrowful sincerity. David nodded along, adding, She's been talking about wanting to leave the brownstone, which is so unlike her. We're just afraid she's not safe making her own decisions anymore." Dr. Evans listened, making notes on his tablet. He then turned to me. "And you, Miranda. You spend the most time with her. What are your observations?" I took a deep breath. This was it. "My observation, Dr. Evans, is that my mother is a sharp, capable woman who is being systematically manipulated and gaslit by the people who are supposed to have her best interests at heart." David shot to his feet. "That is an outrageous lie." Just then, the door to the office opened and Arthur Pendleton stood there immaculate in a three-piece suit, his expression thunderous. "Is it David?" He boomed, his voice filling the room. "Then perhaps you can explain to me and to the good doctor why $80,000 of your mother's money has ended up in your wife's strategic holdings company." The look on David and Lydia's faces was worth every second of the agony of the past week. It was a perfect tableau of shock, panic, and sheer, undiluted terror. The battle lines were now drawn out in the open, and the war was just beginning. The silence in Dr. Evans's office was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the ragged intake of my brother's breath. Lydia's face, usually a mask of composed elegance, had gone sheet white. The color had drained from David's face, leaving two bright spots of red on his cheeks. They looked like children who'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar, only the cookie jar held $80,000. Arthur Pendleton didn't wait for an invitation. He strode into the room, a force of nature in a Savile Row suit, and took up a position behind my mother's chair, his hands resting protectively on her shoulders. Mom, who had seemed small and fragile moments before, straightened her spine, drawing strength from his presence. Dr. Evans said, his professional neutrality fraying at the edges. "This is a private consultation." It was private. Arthur corrected his voice, cutting through the tension. "Now it's an intervention. I believe my friend David was about to explain the consulting fees. Or perhaps Lydia would care to, what strategic services exactly did you provide for this property? Advice on which chandelier to dust first. This is a misunderstanding," David stammered, finally finding his voice. He shot me a look of pure venom. "Miranda, what lies have you been feeding him?" "The truth comes in spreadsheets. David, not whispers." I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I kept my gaze locked on Dr. Evans. "I have the bank statements. I have the transfers. This isn't about my mother's competence. It's about their greed." Lydia found her footing, then her survival instincts kicking in. She turned to Dr. Evans, her eyes wide and pleading. "Doctor, you have to understand we were reimbursing ourselves for expenses, for things we've done for the brownstone, for Nora. This is a family matter being twisted into something ugly, reimbursing yourselves at $5,000 a month." Arthur's laugh was a short, harsh bark. "For what a new conscience, you don't have one." Dr. Evans held up a hand. "Everyone, please." He looked deeply uncomfortable, his gaze shifting from my mother's determined face to David's panicked one. "This changes the context of this meeting significantly. Nora, do you understand what is being discussed?" My mother looked at each of us in turn, her panicked son, his treacherous wife, her furious daughter, her stalwart friend. Her eyes, when they settled on Dr. Evans, were clear and unwavering. "I understand that my son and his wife have been stealing from me, and now they want to lock me away to make it easier to steal the rest." She said, her voice crisp and articulate. "I understand that my daughter has been my true caretaker, and I understand that I do not want David or Lydia to have any power over me or my home ever again. Is that clear enough, Robert?" The use of his first name was a masterstroke. It reminded him of the decades of friendship, of the dinners in her home, of the person she was not the patient she might become. "It is Nora," he said quietly. He closed his tablet with a definitive click. "Given these financial discrepancies, and the clear conflict of interest, I cannot in good conscience support a petition for conservatorship at this time. My medical opinion is that you are fully capable of managing your own affairs." He turned to David and Lydia. "I suggest you retain your own counsel, and I strongly suggest you return the money. We left them there sitting in the wreckage of their plot. The car ride home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence. Charged, yes, but with a sense of grim victory. It didn't last. The retaliation began 2 days later. It started with a formal letter from a law firm so prestigious, its letterhead was practically embossed with gold. It was addressed to me. They claimed I was in breach of my fiduciary duty as property manager, citing questionable maintenance expenditures and lack of proper accounting. They demanded a full audit of all Brownstone finances for the last 5 years and threatened legal action if I did not comply. It was a blatant smear tactic designed to drain my time, my energy, and my limited resources. While they had a bottomless legal war chest, I was living on the salary Mom paid me. Then came the social siege. Lydia was a master of the subtle knife. Whispers began circulating through their powerful social circles. I heard snippets through concerned mutual acquaintances. I always thought Miranda was so devoted, but apparently she's been taking advantage of Nora's generosity. David is heartbroken. He says his sister has turned their mother against him. I heard the brownstone is falling into disrepair under Miranda's management. They were painting me as the villain, the greedy, manipulative daughter, isolating a vulnerable, elderly mother. The irony was so thick, I could taste it like metal on my tongue. The most painful blow, however, came from David himself. He showed up at the brownstone alone one evening. I found him in the grand foyer looking at the family portraits that climbed the sweeping staircase. "We don't have to do this, Miranda," he said without turning around. His voice was tired. "We can still fix this. Call off Arthur. Admit you overreacted about the money. We can find a peaceful solution for Mom. A peaceful solution where you get control." I asked, my arms crossed. "You tried to have me declared incompetent by proxy, David. You stole from our mother. There is no we anymore." He finally turned to face me, and his expression wasn't one of anger, but of a profound, almost pitying sadness. "You always were so dramatic, so black and white. This is how the world works, Miranda. Assets need to be protected. Legacies need to be managed. You're just too sentimental to see it. I'm too sentimental to see theft as asset management," I shot back. "Get out, David." He shook his head as if I were a disappointing student. "You're going to lose. We have the resources. We have the patience. When you're buried in legal motions and your reputation is in tatters, you'll come crawling back. And I'll be generous because I'm your brother. But it will be on my terms." He left, and his words echoed in the vast, silent hall. "You're going to lose." The fear he planted was a cold seed in my gut. He was right about one thing: they had the resources for a war of attrition. I couldn't fight a prolonged legal battle. I would be bankrupt in months. I found Mom in her study staring out at the garden. "He came to see you," she asked softly. "He came to threaten me." I corrected, sinking into the chair opposite her. She was silent for a long moment. "I never wanted this for you children. I wanted you to be each other's protectors." She turned to me, her eyes glistening. "I am so sorry, my darling. My legacy was supposed to be a blessing, not a curse. It's not your fault, Mom." I took her hand. "But we can't just play defense. They're trying to smear me to bankrupt me. I have to show them we're not afraid. I have to hit back where it hurts." A slow, determined smile touched my mother's lips. It was the smile I remembered from my childhood, the one she wore when facing down a stubborn academic rival or a condescending bureaucrat. It was the smile of Nora Evans, historian and strategist. "Then hit back," she said, her voice steady, "but not where it just hurts. Hit back where it destroys their narrative. You've been gathering evidence. Now it's time to wield it. Let's show them what happens when they underestimate us." The cold seed of fear in my gut began to dissolve, replaced by a burning ember of resolve. David and Lydia thought they were playing a game of financial and social chess, but my mother had just reminded me we were playing a different game entirely. We were fighting for our home, and there is no one more dangerous than someone with nothing left to lose. My mother's words were a spark to tinder. The fear that David had planted twisted into a cold, focused fury. They wanted a war fine, but they wouldn't be fighting the accommodating, peacekeeping sister they expected. They would be fighting Nora Evans's daughter. Arthur became our general. We met in the Brownstones' library the next morning, surrounded by the scent of old books and polished wood. He laid out a battle plan with the precision of a man who had spent a lifetime in the courtroom. "They're attacking on two fronts, legal and social," he said, steepling his fingers. "We respond in kind, but we do it smarter. Miranda, you will not respond to their legal threats directly. You will file a countersuit." "On what grounds?" I asked, my stomach fluttering with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. "Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult," he said calmly. "The $80,000 is just the start. We subpoena all of their bank records, their business accounts. We show a pattern. We make it so ugly and so public that their fancy law firm will advise them to settle just to avoid the stink." He then turned to my mother. "Nora, you need to update your will. Today. And your power of attorney. We remove David and Lydia entirely. We name Miranda as your sole agent and executor. It's a declarative act. It tells the world and the court exactly who you trust." Mom nodded, her jaw set. "Do it." As for the social front, Arthur continued, a sly smile playing on his lips. "We don't fight the whispers, we drown them out. Nora, you're throwing a party." I stared at him. "A party?" "Now, especially now," he said. "The annual Evans Summer Gala. We hold it right here in 2 weeks. We invite everyone. The political donors, the journalists, the society pages. We don't hide Nora away. We put her on display in her element as the brilliant, capable matriarch she is. You, Miranda, will be at her side, the competent, devoted daughter, managing the event flawlessly. We show the world the truth, and we let David and Lydia skulk in the corners if they're brave enough to even show up. It was brilliant. It was audacious. It was exactly the kind of strategic masterstroke that could turn the tide. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. I worked with a lawyer. Arthur recommended a sharp, relentless woman named Isabel Rossi to file the countersuit. The document was a thing of beauty, detailing every fraudulent transfer, and it included a sworn affidavit from Arthur about the events in Dr. Evans's office. We were not asking for a quiet settlement. We were demanding full restitution, punitive damages, and a permanent injunction barring them from any financial decisions regarding my mother. Simultaneously, we plunged into party planning. We sent out invitations to 300 of Washington's elite. The theme was a night at the museum, a nod to Mom's career. We would use her own historical artifacts as decor. I managed every detail from the caterers to the string quartet with a ruthless efficiency I didn't know I possessed. This wasn't just a party, it was a military operation. The morning of the gala, a courier delivered a thick envelope. It was from David and Lydia's lawyers, a response to our lawsuit. They weren't backing down. They were denying everything, claiming the money was authorized gifts and that our lawsuit was a transparent attempt by Miranda Evans to alienate her mother for her own financial gain. The hypocrisy was staggering, but the attached motion made my blood run cold. They were requesting an emergency independent medical evaluation of my mother, claiming her current state was a result of undue influence from me. They were trying to have her declared incompetent again, using me as the villain. I showed the documents to Mom and Arthur in the sunroom. Mom read them slowly, her hands steady. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "They will not win," she said, her voice low and fierce. "They will not paint you as my jailer when you are my liberator. Tonight, we show them." The gala was a symphony of controlled chaos. The brownstone glittered. Candlelight flickered off crystal and silver. The air hummed with conversation and the delicate notes of a Vivaldi concerto. Mom, dressed in a stunning navy blue gown, held court in the main drawing room. She was radiant, recalling anecdotes about various artifacts with perfect clarity, her laugh ringing out. I watched from the periphery, a proud and vigilant sentinel. Then they arrived. David and Lydia stood in the doorway, looking like they'd walked into their own funeral. Lydia was wearing a bold red dress, a statement of defiance that fell flat in the elegant room. The conversation around them dipped for a moment, then resumed at a louder, more animated pitch. They were being watched, and they knew it. They made their way toward Mom. I moved to intercept, but Arthur laid a gentle hand on my arm. "Let it play out," he murmured. Mother David said, his voice tight. "You look well." "I am well, David," she replied, her tone polite but frosty. "Thank you for coming." Lydia's smile was brittle. "Nora, the house looks busy. It must be so overwhelming for you." On the contrary, Mom said, her voice carrying easily. "I find the energy invigorating. It reminds me of the salons your father and I used to host. Of course, the conversation was a bit more substantive then, less about asset management and more about managing one's character." A few people within earshot stifled laughs. Lydia's smile vanished. David leaned in closer, his voice a low hiss. "Mom, this has gone far enough. This lawsuit is tearing our family apart. Call it off. We can still talk about this like reasonable people." Mom looked at him, and for a moment I saw the ghost of the heartbroken mother in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the steel of Nora Evans. "You stopped being reasonable when you decided to steal from me, David," she said, her voice not loud but clear and carrying in the sudden lull of conversation around us. "You stopped being my son when you tried to have me declared insane to cover your theft. There is nothing left to talk about. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have guests who actually care about my well-being." She turned her back on him. It was the most devastating dismissal imaginable. The social death sentence she had just delivered in that crowded room was more powerful than any legal motion. I saw the realization dawn on David's face that he had lost, not just the legal battle, but his mother, his standing everything. The look of sheer panic devastation was so raw I had to look away. Lydia, however, was not defeated. As they turned to leave, she caught my eye across the room, and she smiled. It wasn't a smile of concession. It was a smile of pure, undiluted malice, a promise that this was not over. The party was a triumph. But as the last guests departed and the silence settled back over the brownstone, Arthur's phone buzzed. He listened for a moment, his face grim. "That was Isabel," he said, hanging up. The judge granted their motion. The independent medical evaluation is scheduled for Thursday. The victory of the evening evaporated. They had lost the battle of public opinion, but the war for my mother's freedom was now hinging on a single 3-hour appointment with a stranger. The counterattack had been launched, but the enemy was far from surrender. The triumph of the gala evaporated into the cold, hard reality of the pending evaluation. 3 days. We had 72 hours to prepare for a 3-hour examination that would determine whether my mother remained the master of her own mind and life, or if she would be legally stripped of her autonomy. Dr. Alistair Finch was a renowned forensic psychiatrist. His reputation was built on impartiality, a man who could not be swayed by social pressure or emotional appeals. He was a blank slate, a human algorithm designed to assess cognitive function. And that terrified me, because algorithms don't understand love or sacrifice, or the subtle, soul-crushing weight of betrayal. They only understand data points. Arthur had dug into his background. He's a straight shooter. He can't be bought, and he can't be bullied. That's good for us because David can't influence him. But it also means he won't be swayed by our side of the story. He will only care about what happens in that room. We prepared like it was the most important exam of our lives. We didn't try to cram or create a false version of Mom. Instead, we focused on mitigating the very real stress that could cause her to falter. We practiced relaxation techniques. We went over the kinds of questions he might ask, not to memorize answers, but to demystify the process so it wouldn't feel like an inquisition. The night before, I found Mom in her study staring at a photograph of David and me as children, building a sandcastle on a long-ago beach vacation. Her finger traced the outline of his laughing face. "I keep looking for the moment I failed him," she whispered, her voice thick. "The moment I made him into this stranger." I knelt beside her. "You didn't, Mom. You raised us the same. He made his choices." "Did I?" She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. Was I too hard on him? Too easy? Did I love him enough? "Mom, you worked 2 jobs to put him through law school after Dad died. You loved him more than enough. This is not on you. This is on him and the greedy, social-climbing woman he married." She nodded slowly, but the doubt lingered in her eyes. It was the most potent weapon David and Lydia had the ability to make a good mother question her own goodness. The next morning, we arrived at Dr. Finch's office. It was a sterile, neutral space devoid of personality. No family photos, no personal knickknacks. Just a desk, a few chairs, and a large clock on the wall, its ticking suddenly the loudest sound in the world. David and Lydia were already there, seated in the waiting room. They didn't look at us. The silence between us was a physical chasm. Dr. Finch called my mother in alone. He was a man in his 60s with a calm, inscrutable face and eyes that missed nothing. The door clicked shut behind them and the wait began. I sat on one side of the room, David and Lydia on the other. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I could feel Lydia's gaze on me, but I refused to meet it. I stared at a bland print of a sailboat on a calm sea, my mind racing. Was she remembering the names of the presidents? Was she recounting the date correctly? What if he asked her about the burner phone and the stress made her confused? After an hour, the door opened. Dr. Finch gestured to me. "Ms. Evans, could you join us for a moment?" My heart leapt into my throat. This was it. This was where he asked me about the undue influence. I walked into the room, my knees weak. Mom sat in the chair, her posture perfect, but her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. "Your mother has been answering my questions with remarkable clarity." Dr. Finch began, his tone unreadable. "However, I'd like you to clarify something for me. She states that you are the sole manager of the Georgetown brownstone. Is that correct?" "Yes." I said, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "I've been the on-site property manager for 5 years. I handle the rentals, the maintenance, the finances related to its operation. And prior to that, my mother managed it herself. She only brought me on after her minor fall as a precaution. She's always been very hands-on." He made a note. "She also mentioned that your brother David and his wife have not been supportive of this arrangement. Can you elaborate?" I chose my words carefully, sticking to facts, not feelings. They have expressed a desire for my mother to move to a facility and for the brownstone to be sold. They have also, without her knowledge or consent, withdrawn approximately $80,000 from the property's accounts for their personal use. We are currently in litigation over this." He nodded, his expression still neutral. "Thank you, Ms. Evans. That will be all." I was dismissed. As I walked back to the waiting room, I felt like I'd just been through a ringer. What did he make of that? Did he see me as a protective daughter or a controlling one? Another agonizing hour passed. Then Dr. Finch called David and Lydia in. They were in there for less than 30 minutes. When they emerged, David's face was a thundercloud, and Lydia's was pinched with fury. They left without a word. Finally, after 3 full hours, the door opened and Mom walked out. She looked exhausted, but her head was high. Dr. Finch stood in the doorway. "The evaluation is complete," he said. "My report will be filed with the court within 48 hours. I will not be discussing my findings with any of you prior to that. Good day." The drive home was silent. We were both too emotionally drained to speak. The waiting was worse than the evaluation itself. Our fate was now in the hands of a man we barely knew, his opinion reduced to a document that would land on a judge's desk. 48 hours later, the email from Isabel Rossi arrived. The subject line was Finch Report. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. Miranda. The report is in. It's a mixed bag. Call me immediately. My heart plummeted. A mixed bag. What did that mean? I called her, putting her on speakerphone so Mom could hear. Isabel, I said, my voice tight. What happened? Okay, here's the breakdown. She said, her tone all business. Finch is thorough. On cognitive function, Nora aced it. He states unequivocally that she shows no signs of dementia or diminished capacity. He notes her memory, reasoning, and executive function are all intact and in some areas exceptional for her age. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with relief. But I prompted, hearing the hesitation in Isabel's voice. But, she continued, he dedicates a significant portion of the report to the family dynamic. He notes the high level of conflict and describes it as acrimonious and potentially detrimental to her emotional well-being. He doesn't assign blame, but he observes that the situation has caused her significant distress. That's because her son is robbing her, I exclaimed. I know, Isabel soothed, and he does note the financial allegations as a central point of conflict. However, and this is the crucial part, he concludes that while Nora Evans is capable of managing her own affairs, the current environment of sustained familial conflict presents a significant risk to her overall welfare. The room seemed to tilt. What does that mean, Isabel? It means the judge now has a choice, she said, her voice grim. He can look at the clear cognitive results and deny the conservatorship, or he can look at the risk to her welfare and appoint a neutral third-party conservator to manage her finances for her protection. It wouldn't be David, but it wouldn't be you or Nora either. It would be a stranger. The hearing is in 1 week. We have to be prepared for anything. I hung up the phone and looked at my mother. We had won the battle over her mind, but we were on the precipice of losing the war over her freedom. Dr. Finch, in his impeccable impartiality, had handed the judge a justification to take control away from all of us. The victory felt hollow. The war was now down to a single hearing, and the outcome was more uncertain than ever. The week leading up to the hearing was a special kind of torture. The Finch report was a double-edged sword, and we lived in its shadow. We had won the scientific battle, but we were in danger of losing the philosophical one. The law I was learning cared less about absolute truth than about manageable risk, and Dr. Finch had framed our family as an unmanageable risk. Isabel Rossi prepared us with the grim determination of a surgeon before a difficult operation. The judge's name is Patricia Walker. She's no-nonsense, has a low tolerance for dramatics, and has seen every trick in the book. She will have read the Finch report. Our job is to convince her that the risk to welfare is entirely external, coming from David and Lydia, and that the best protection for Nora is to leave her in the care of the person she explicitly trusts with the legal tools to keep the predators at bay. The tools she referred to were the updated will and power of attorney which we had executed. They were powerful, but they could be challenged if Mom were declared incompetent. This hearing was about preserving that competence. The morning of the hearing, I helped Mom dress in a sophisticated conservative navy suit. She looked like the formidable academic. She was not a vulnerable elderly woman. I feel like I'm going to my own trial, she murmured, adjusting her pearl necklace. In a way, you are, I said, straightening her collar, but you have the best defense team in the city. The courthouse was a monument to imposing granite and bureaucracy. Our footsteps echoed in the marbled hallway as we approached the designated courtroom. David and Lydia were already there, flanked by their 2 high-priced attorneys. They looked like a corporate board ready for a hostile takeover. We took our seats at the opposing table. The air was cold and smelled of old wood and anxiety. Judge Walker entered a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a brisk, efficient manner. She immediately set the tone. "This is a hearing on the petition for conservatorship of Nora Evans." She began, her voice clear and carrying. "I have read the Finch report. I am primarily interested in facts and testimony that clarify the points of contention within it. Let's begin. Lauer, David's lawyer, a man named Sterling with a voice like smoothed gravel, went first. He painted a picture of a loving son desperately concerned for his mother's well-being. He spoke of the strange sale of minor family heirlooms Mom had authorized me to handle for liquidity, framing them as erratic decisions. He mentioned the isolation from her other son, carefully avoiding the reason for that isolation. He presented the $80,000 not as theft, but as a misunderstanding within a complex family financial arrangement. Then he called Lydia to the stand. She was a perfect witness. Poised, articulate, her voice dripping with feigned concern. She spoke of finding the kitchen in disarray of Mom's confusion about recent events. She expertly wove half-truths and lies into a tapestry of plausible doubt. "Is it true, Mrs. Evans," Sterling asked, "that you believe your mother-in-law is susceptible to influence?" "Yes," Lydia said, casting a sorrowful glance our way. "Since Miranda moved in, my mother-in-law has become increasingly distrustful of us, her own family. It's as if she's being turned against us. We just want what's best for her." It was my turn. Isabel stood for the cross-examination. She started softly. "Mrs. Evans, you stated you found the kitchen in disarray. Can you describe that?" "Oh, you know," Lydia said with a dismissive wave. "Pots left out, pantry items misplaced. It was unsettling." "Is it possible," Isabel asked, her tone conversational, "that the pots were out because a meal had just been cooked and that the pantry was being reorganized by the housekeeper, as she does every Thursday?" Lydia's smile tightened. "I suppose it's possible." "And this isolation you speak of, when was the last time you invited Nora to your home for a quiet dinner?" Lydia hesitated. "Well, we've been very busy, and the atmosphere has been tense." "Because you were stealing from her." Isabel's question came like a whip crack. "Objection!" Sterling boomed. "Sustained," Judge Walker said, but she looked intently at Lydia. Isabel switched gears. "You mentioned a complex family financial arrangement, the $80,000 in question. Did you have signed authorization from Nora Evans for these consulting fees?" Lydia shifted in her seat. "It was a verbal understanding, a family matter. A verbal understanding for $5,000 monthly payments." Isabel let the absurdity hang in the air. "No invoices, no service contracts, nothing but monthly transfers to an account you control." Lydia's composure began to crack. "We were reimbursing ourselves for expenses." "Then please provide the court with the receipts for those expenses," Isabel said calmly. "We have subpoenaed your business records. They show no such receipts. They do, however, show purchases from luxury boutiques and a payment for a luxury convertible around the time of the largest transfers." The color drained from Lydia's face. She hadn't expected us to dig that deep. Isabel didn't wait for an answer. No further questions. It was our turn. We called Arthur. He was magnificent. He testified not as a furious friend, but as a retired officer of the court, gravely concerned about a crime in progress. He described the conversation he'd overheard, the systematic gaslighting, and his professional opinion that Nora Evans was one of the most capable individuals he knew. Then it was my turn to take the stand. My palms were slick with sweat. Isabel guided me gently through my testimony, my role as property manager, my discovery of the stolen funds, my daily life with Mom. I spoke of her brilliance, her clarity, her love for her home. Then Sterling stood for cross-examination. He tried to rattle me, his tone condescending. "Ms. Evans, isn't it true that your own financial situation is precarious? that you have a vested interest in maintaining control of your mother's multi-million-dollar asset. I met his gaze. My interest is in maintaining my mother's happiness and autonomy, something your clients seem to have no interest in. He bristled. You live in the brownstone rent-free, do you not? I live there as my mother's primary caregiver and property manager. It is part of my compensation, an arrangement she herself designed and is perfectly happy with. And you don't think that clouds your judgment that this entire situation is really about you ensuring your own financial security. I looked from his smug face to David's stony one, to my mother's anxious eyes, and something in me snapped, not into anger, but into a profound, clear calm. My financial security. I repeated, my voice steady and loud enough to fill the room. I watched my mother work 2 jobs to put my brother through an expensive law school. I watched her wear the same coat for 10 years so he could have the right suits for his interviews. I have spent the last 5 years of my life dedicating myself to her and her home. My brother spent those same years stealing from her. So you'll have to excuse me if I find your question about my financial security not just insulting, but profoundly revealing about the character of the people you represent. A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Sterling was speechless. Even Judge Walker looked momentarily taken aback. I had gone off script. I had spoken from the heart. And as I looked at my brother, I saw the final fragile shield of his self-justification shatter. He was no longer the concerned son in a difficult situation. He was a thief being exposed in a court of law by his own sister. There were no more questions. In the end, the law cared about facts, and the facts were on our side. Judge Walker delivered her ruling from the bench. Based on the testimony and evidence presented today and incorporating the cognitive findings of Dr. Finch, I find that Nora Evans is fully capable of managing her own person and estate. She said, her words falling like gavel strikes. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Furthermore, the financial exploitation alleged is serious and will be addressed in the pending civil case. I am issuing a temporary restraining order barring David and Lydia Evans from any financial transactions involving Nora Evans or her estate and from contacting her except through legal counsel. It was over. We had won. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't look at us. He just walked out a broken man. Lydia followed, her head held high in a final, futile act of defiance. I helped my mother to her feet. She was trembling, but her eyes were clear and dry. She looked at the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Walker gave her a small, respectful nod. "Good luck to you, Ms. Evans." We walked out of the courtroom into the bright, indifferent light of the hallway. The battle was won. The brownstone was safe. Mom's freedom was intact. But as I watched my brother's retreating back disappear around a corner, I knew the cost had been immeasurable. The war was over, and we had lost a son and a brother to win it. The silence in the car on the way home from the courthouse was heavier than any that had come before. It wasn't the tense silence of waiting or the furious silence of confrontation. It was the hollow, echoing silence of loss. We had won everything we set out to win my mother's freedom, the protection of the law, the public vindication. But the cost sat between us in the back of the town car, a ghost with my brother's face. Mom stared out the window, watching the city blur past. She didn't cry. She just looked empty. The righteous fire that had carried her through the hearing had burned out, leaving only ashes. When we arrived back at the brownstone, the grand foyer felt different. It was no longer just a battlefield. It was a memorial. Every portrait, every piece of furniture held the echo of a family that no longer existed. The next few weeks were a strange, liminal period. The temporary restraining order became a permanent injunction. The civil case now, with the judge's ruling, bolstering our position, settled quickly and quietly. David and Lydia returned the $80,000 plus an additional $50,000 in damages and legal fees. The wire transfer hit the Brownstones' account with a cold digital finality. There was no note, no apology, just a string of numbers that represented the price of my brother's betrayal. I thought the financial victory would feel sweeter. It didn't. It felt like blood money. I threw myself into work managing the property with a frenetic energy, trying to fill the silence with activity. I approved long-delayed maintenance projects, updated the booking system, and even started planning a small, tasteful renovation of the master suite for Mom. But the ghost followed me room to room. It was Mrs. Bertha Washington, my mother's oldest friend from the neighborhood, who finally broke through the stalemate of our grief. She came over one afternoon with a basket of still warm scones and a no-nonsense attitude. I heard she said, settling into the armchair opposite my mother in the sunroom. She didn't offer platitudes. She simply took a bite of a scone and said, "It's a terrible thing. A mother's worst nightmare. But you two are still here. This house is still here. And it's filled with more love and history than that boy could ever comprehend." She looked at me. "And you, Miranda, you have been a lioness. But even lionesses need to rest. What are you going to do now that you don't have to fight for it anymore?" Her question hung in the air. What was I going to do? For 5 years, my identity had been caretaker. For the last few months, it had been warrior. Now the war was over. The peace felt unfamiliar and unsettling. It was Mom who answered, her voice soft but clear. "She's going to live her life, Bertha. We both are." That night, over a simple dinner, we talked. Really talked. Not about lawsuits or strategies, but about the future. The settlement money, Mom said, pushing her peas around her plate. "I don't want it sitting in an account tainted. I want us to use it. For something good. For us." "What did you have in mind?" I asked. She put her fork down. "I want to travel. I spent my life studying history and books. I want to see some of it. And I don't want to go alone." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Come with me, Miranda. Let's get out of this house. Let's remember who we are when we're not just defending it." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. Leave the brownstone. The place I had fought so hard to protect, but the business, I stammered, "can be managed by an agency for a few months," she said, a familiar, stubborn glint in her eye. "Arthur can keep an eye on the finances. It's time, Miranda. This house was meant to be a home, not a fortress. And we've been living under siege for too long." She was right. The brownstone had become a symbol of the conflict, its every room a reminder. We needed to reclaim it, and to do that, we needed to leave it for a while. So we began to plan. We pored over maps and travel guides, deciding on a tour of Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice. We bought new suitcases. We got passports renewed. The activity was a balm, a new kind of strategy focused on joy instead of survival. The day before we were set to leave, a letter arrived. It was addressed to my mother in David's handwriting. My stomach clenched. Mom took it from me, her hand steady. She opened it slowly, read it, and then silently passed it to me. It wasn't long. It wasn't an apology. "Mom, I know there's nothing I can say that will matter. I've made my choices. I lost my way. I convinced myself that ambition was the same as provision, that entitlement was the same as love. I see now what I've destroyed. I don't expect your forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I see it. I hope you and Miranda find some peace." David. The words were stark and bleak. There was no self-pity, no blame-shifting. It was a cold, hard acknowledgement of his own moral bankruptcy. It was in its own way more devastating than any excuse he could have made. Mom folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer. "That's that," then she whispered more to herself than to me. The next morning, as the taxi pulled away from the curb, I looked back at the brownstone. It stood proud and beautiful in the morning sun, no longer a weight on my shoulders, but just a a place we would return to, but one that no longer held us captive. On the flight to Rome, Mom fell asleep with her head against the window. I watched the clouds stretch out below us, an endless soft landscape of possibility. The battle for the brownstone was over. We had lost a son, a brother. But in losing him, we had found each other again, and we had found ourselves. The war was over. And for the first time in years, we were free. We returned from Italy 3 months later, our skin sun-kissed and our souls noticeably lighter. The brownstone, when we stepped inside, didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It smelled of lemon polish and fresh flowers, courtesy of the management agency, but more than that, it felt waiting. It was no longer a relic of a battle, but a shell ready to be filled with a new kind of life. The transformation didn't happen overnight. The ghost of David was still there in the corner of a photograph, in the silence where his laugh used to be. But the ghost no longer had power over us. It was just a memory bittersweet, but no longer sharp enough to draw blood. With the settlement money and the steady income from the property, I didn't need to work the way I had before. The constant grinding fear of financial instability was gone, so I went back to school. I enrolled in a graduate program for historic preservation, a passion I'd abandoned in my 20s. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd lost to my divorce and the ensuing survival mode. Mom, invigorated by our travels, didn't slip back into quiet retirement. She started writing a memoir, not a dry historical text, but a vibrant personal account of her life in Washington, the salons she'd hosted, the characters she'd known, and the history she'd witnessed from the unique vantage point of her Georgetown brownstone. It was her way of taking control of her narrative one last time. One afternoon, about a year after the hearing, I was in the library surrounded by architectural blueprints when the doorbell rang. It was a courier with a thick, legal-looking envelope. My heart, trained by past trauma, gave a familiar, painful lurch. But when I saw the return address, Isabel Rossi's firm, my anxiety eased. Inside wasn't a summons, but a cover letter from Isabel and a copy of a filed petition. David and Lydia were divorcing. Isabel's note was brief. Thought you should know. It's not public yet. The filing is acrimonious. Apparently their strategic holdings couldn't withstand the pressure. Hope you and Nora are well. I held the papers in my hands, the final crumbling chapter of my brother's Faustian bargain. There was no satisfaction in it, only a profound, weary sadness. He had traded his mother, his sister, and his own integrity for a life with Lydia, and now even that was gone. I showed the documents to my mother. She read them slowly, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she set them aside on her desk next to a page of her manuscript. "I pity him," she said finally, her gaze distant. "To build your life on such a shaky foundation. It was always going to fall. I just never thought I'd have to be one of the pillars he chose to dismantle." She never tried to contact him. Neither did I. The letter he'd sent before our trip was his last communication, and we accepted it as the closing of a door. Some ruptures are too profound to mend, some truths too ugly to paper over with polite family dinners. Our peace was hard won, and we would not sacrifice it on the altar of forced reconciliation. The following spring, my mother's memoir was published. It became a surprise local bestseller praised for its wit and its intimate portrait of a vanishing Washington. She was interviewed on NPR, her voice clear and intelligent, filling the rooms of the brownstone she had made famous. On the day of her book launch party, the house was full again, but this time it was different. The guests were her friends, her colleagues, my classmates, people who genuinely cared for us. The energy was warm, celebratory, alive. I stood by the fireplace watching her hold court-signing books and laughing, truly laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. Arthur Pendleton sidled up to me, a glass of champagne in his hand. He followed my gaze. "She's in her element." He set a fond smile on his face. "You did that, you know. You gave her back her life." "We did it together," I corrected, leaning against his shoulder for a brief, grateful moment. I just handed her the ammunition. She was the one who remembered how to fight. He nodded. "And you." What has the lioness become now that the hunt is over? I looked around the room at the proud, beautiful house, at my brilliant, resilient mother, and at the blueprints for my future scattered on the desk in the next room. I was no longer just a caretaker or a warrior or a victim. I'm the cornerstone. I said, the realization settling into me with a deep and final certainty, not the one that holds up the walls, but the one everything else is built upon, for her and for me. He clinked his glass against mine. A fine thing to be. Later, as the last guests trickled out, Mom and I sat together in the quiet library just as we had so many nights before. The silence was no longer hollow. It was comfortable earned. "This is enough," she said, reaching over and taking my hand. Her skin was thin, mapped with veins and age, but her grip was strong. "This life with you. It's more than enough. It's everything." I squeezed her hand back. The battle for the brownstone was a memory, now a dark chapter, that had forged us into who we were always meant to be, two strong women, bound not just by blood, but by a shared victory over betrayal. We had lost a son, but we had saved each other. And in the end, that was the only legacy that mattered.